Svinavadidamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namah Shivaya, welcome to another meditation practice. And today is day 2 of us discussing from chapter 2, sutra number 3, the kleshas, avidya, smita, raga, devasya, abhidibhesha, pancha klesha. Yesterday we talked about avidya, misknowing, assuming that you don't are not identifying with the higher self, but identifying with the body, identifying with material things around you, identifying with your job, your position, all kinds of things, gender, race, sexuality, misidentification. Today, where asmita is the ego, allowing the ego or the egoism of an individual to dominate. And so ego and the discussion of ego, this comes up a lot in yoga teachings. I've heard a lot of times people, yoga teachers, asana teachers, talk about ego in an asana class, and sometimes I think that the idea and the concepts of ego are misinterpreted. So ego, when we talk about egoism, the best way to describe it and to kind of start to understand it is to, look at children around the age of 3. Remember that line, terrible threes? Or this is about the time period when children are able to really communicate, express their wants, their desires, and they also have learned the word no. They've learned resistance. They've learned that if they do certain things, they're praised. If they do certain things, they're maybe told not to do them, and they start to manipulate the world around them, and that's the ego. That's at that point in your life that you're using the ego for survival skills. Now, if you think about how a child could be, I remember when I was a little kid, and I have a sister who's 4 years younger than I am, and about that age, around 3 or 4, when I had a birthday, she would demand that she get a present and a cake because it was my birthday, and she would cry, and then my parents would scramble to get her a present or get her a cake or have a slice of cake for her with a candle in it. That went for a couple of years, but that was the ego talking. That was the child's ego demanding that it be acknowledged, and that somebody else or someone else wasn't acknowledged. The problem is then we learn to manipulate the world using that childlike ego, and we continue it through our young adult life and into adult life. And we all know people who are adults, they always have to be right. Right? That you cannot, whatever you're discussing, whether they have vast amounts of knowledge about a subject or not, they always have to be right. We know people who who are adults who, um, when you're having a conversation with them, they never stop talking. Like, right, they can't ever listen. They always have to talk. Usually those people always have to be right too. That's the ego talking. Um, we know people who, who are in business with us, maybe somebody you work with, that they always have to it always has to be their idea, or they always have to be the best in the room, or they are always going to kind of upstage everyone else so they get the praise. But then we also know people who purposely go out to be the one who's always sad, or always um, uh, lagging behind, or needs more attention and support than the rest of the group. We see that a lot of times in our adult lives. That's ego talking too. Okay, so it's very easy for us to point to the one that always has to be right, the one that always has to be the center of attention, and say, oh, that's ego. It's hard for us to understand that there are people who manipulate just like children do, that I will cry, I will feel sorry for myself, I will um, let everybody know that I'm lesser than, and I will get their sympathy and get their attention. That is the ego. Okay? Um, it's childlike emotions. It's childlike needs. It's needs that pull away from the totality of the group and focus on the individual. A lot of times in yoga classes, asana classes, I remember being in an asana class with a teacher that I really did like. They don't teach yoga anymore, but we were working on Hanumanasana split, and he started to talk about, don't let your ego get the best of you. You don't have to go down all the way. You don't have to touch the floor. And I listened to him talk, and he really kind of started, talking to a couple of people individually who were coming down fully into the asana. Um, and I thought about how that his idea of egoism was misguided. Egoism isn't trying to achieve something, right? These people were trying to achieve an act of coming into a full split, maybe having their pelvis touch the floor and having both legs extended without props. That's not egoism. That's working toward a goal. What is egoism is if one of those students looked up and said, oh, teacher, look at me. Look how good I'm doing. Look how bad she's doing. Right? That's egoism. That if they were starting to ask for affirmation of what a good job they were doing, just like the person who also possibly we don't ever point to the fact that there are people who also come to a yoga class. You do an asana like Hanumanasana, and they're in the back of the room with all their props. This is so hard. I can't do this. And they verbally start communicating their struggle. That's the ego talking. That's the same ego that you're talking about with the person who has achieved the pinnacle and wants acknowledgement. Same ego. Um, Yoga teachers and spiritual teachers can also be egotistical. Um, and that's also very hard to point out when people who say that they're spiritual teachers start to become egotistical. One of my favorites is I have a friend they're a young yoga teacher, and they've started to quote themselves on Instagram, like making little boxes with something they've said and then their name underneath it, and they're posting it and kind of then tagging themselves, and that's egoism. That's an egotistical kind of teacher that they want to be acknowledged for what they said. They didn't just say it, or say it in a video and let somebody else pick it up and say, "Wow, that was really insightful what they said." They're telling you that they're insightful. They want you to tell them in return what kind of insight they have. Um, and that's ego talking. So ego becomes a kind of childlike neediness that um, draws away from the the bigger scope of things and onto the small individual I. The I that's not a capital I. It's the small I. And and egoism is when that small I starts to whine and bellyache and cry and stomp its feet and let everybody know that it's unhappy. Um, that's egoism. So egoism can work both ways. There are those people that are called out for being egotistical because, like I said, they can achieve something. They're like, have that star quality or star power. Um, but egoism can work the opposite way. The person who's always needy, who's always looking for support and coddling and patting on the back. Um, the practice is for us to recognize it. Is to recognize that we're identifying with these very childlike emotions, and demanding that those childlike emotions be taken care of by others. We become kind of energy vampires in a way, that we're starting to need energy from everybody else to feel good about ourselves. Um, and when we start to recognize it, I think that egoism is probably the hardest thing to get over, because you have to change the way that you have worked in the world. And when I say in the world, it's like how you function at your job, how you function with your family, how you function with your friends, how you function with strangers, how you function in social settings. You have to rethink how you do that when you realize that you're allowing your ego to dominate. Um, that and that can only be done with the ability to meditate. You have to create this meditation practice so that you sit with yourself and that you can start to evaluate the emotions, the feelings. That's why Sri Brahmananda Saraswati, calls yoga self-analysis. You're analyzing the self to understand the higher self. And so while we want to just take a moment, we want to choose your seat and consciously place your body. And then once you've found a seat that you feel confident in, close the eyes. And bring the senses inward. the breath to deepen. Allow yourself to experience full inhales and complete exhales. And today, let's continue with that mantra of I am that we started with on day one of our discussion of these blocks to yoga. I am ending in nothing, because if we allow space to exist after am, we are identifying with infinity, the eternal, the everlasting. As you inhale deeply, silently say to yourself, I. And as you exhale deeply, silently say to yourself, am. And as the mind wanders, as the thoughts come in, identify with the I am and not the thoughts. Let the thoughts come, let the thoughts go. Allow the breath to be deep and full and complete. Inhale I. Exhale am. Inhale I. Exhale am. Continue to deep inhales, deep exhales. Silently tell yourself, I am not this body. Silently tell yourself, I am not this mind. Silently tell yourself, I am not these thoughts. Silently tell yourself, I am not these emotions. And tell yourself that you are infinity, everlasting and eternal. Bringing your hands together, rubbing your hands together, building heat within the hands. Bring the hands over the eyes, allow the heat from the hands to be absorbed within the eyes. And gently open the eyes, bring the hands across the forehead, the top of the head, the back of the head, the nape of the neck. And then bring the hands together, bowing down, allowing the forehead to touch the hands. Giving thanks and praise for the teachings of yoga and the teachers that have brought us these teachings. Om Bolo Sadguru Bhagavan Ki Jai. So when we talk about that idea of ego, let's let's be clear about the difference between the desire to achieve a goal and the need for acknowledgement of that goal, or vice versa, the idea that the inability to achieve a goal, and the desire to have people rally around you to support you because you can't achieve that goal. That's ego. That's ego. Um, Great spiritual masters and deeply spiritual people, um, they don't need that kind of acknowledgement either way. They they are, are content uh, with where they are. They're that idea of being in that moment, in that space, in that part of the practice without, you know, experiencing the highs or the lows. They've let go of the ego. They're right there in the middle.